Hello, my friend.
Hello.
I'm really happy to have you back. I feel like in the catching up that we were just doing, like it's been a long time. And you are someone who I have known as much as one can know a person when you're in kind of online circle friendships rather than like spend all my days with you kind of friendship. So, yeah, it's been a while. Thanks for coming and having this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, like virtual friends, right? It's like you're kind of nearly a friend. I don't know what you look like in the person. I don't. Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
It is because I don't think that you and I have even actually hung out in real life. So we've still got that, like, oh, for you, oh wow, you're short thing, right? And I, because people are always surprised by how short I am when they haven't met me in real life. So
Right.
yeah, I think it's one of them.
Yeah. People are always surprised how enormous I am in real life. They're like, oh, we only ever see head and shoulders.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works. And then it's like, whoa.
I mean, I get that impression because we've been friends that long. We would be able to figure that out. But anyway, that's by the by. I asked you back because you posted something on your Facebook around adulting and around my interpretation of it was around initiations and that there aren't spaces for initiations and that there's a lot of people who uh, aren't adults running around running the show. And it hit something for me. I wrote a second book a long time ago that I never published because I never finished it. And in it, I opened with a quote from Clerks, which is I'm not even supposed to be here today, right? And the intro kind of goes on to explain that we are the adults now, and that while we still think we're kind of that age, and that we're not even supposed to be here and none of it's our responsibility, we are the adults now. Like we are the people that this falls to. And I kind of got that sense from the thing that you posted. And so yeah, I don't know where this will go, but I'm gonna start by asking you, what part of being an adult do you think that we all suck at?
I think it's even further upstream. I think it's even knowing what adulting is, like knowing what the nature of it is. I think we suck at that.
Mhm.
I ask people all the time, Ebony, like, how did you spend your 18th birthday? How do you spend your 18th birthday? How did you spend yours?
I can't remember, but I am very unusual because there would have been two parts to it. There would have been get wasted, hang out with my friends on Brighton Beach part, I imagine. And
Mm.
then there would have been a ceremonial in the woods, rites of passage type
Oh,
piece as well, because that was how I was brought up. And I had these two worlds for a long time. I kind of had the ceremonial TP nature, spending time alone, doing things intentionally and on purpose part. And then I also had the desperately trying to be cool part. How do I fit in with the mainstream world, the people who do TV dinners and go to a state school stuff? So yeah.
see, this is why I'm so glad we're talking. You're the first person in nearly a year who's actually had an answer that isn't like the first part. Went out, got wasted, stayed at home, went and had a meal, got drunk or whatever. Um, so I think becoming an adult, which in our culture is mostly 18, isn't it? It's marked by events and then things you can do, but that's it. So I think what we suck at is like knowing what it actually means.
Mm.
And I think us, like we're not even good at talking about the nature of it, and it seems like a quite an avoidant subject for many, not all obviously, but many. And
I find that really interesting because literally the nature of the work that I do, like I call it self-actualization, and it is about taking people into maturity, right? And yet there are people in our world who are reasonably well known who, when I said to them, I'm changing the name of the podcast and bringing back adulting with Ebony, there was a snigger as if it might be around, oh, that sounds like it might be about porn and like sex and stuff. And I'm like, how old are you? Like actually, and this person, I'm not even going to go gender here, that this person is in their 40s, right? And it, like, for me, there's a little moment of like, huh, okay, we still have work to do.
yeah, yeah, hell of a lot of work. You're doing the kind of work that I think should be. I think more parents need to be doing that work with their kids. I think more leaders need to be doing that with the cultures that they're becoming the beacon of, you know, or at least becoming a representation of. So I'm generally quite excited when I see the kind of work you're doing around initiation and helping somebody transition, right? Like helping somebody move, not become like arrested development, you know, in areas. I just want to see more of that, not just with like, oh, I'm going to a retreat, a crazy little retreat, and everyone looks at that and is like, what? You know, where the majority will look at that as weird, and it's like, dude, this should be normal. This shit used to be normal, you know?
It was. And then in my world, in the realms that I hang out in, right, there's also still, I mean, still, we've flipped into this. I grew up in a household where we talked about spiritual bypassing over breakfast when I was 14, right? So it has always been something that I understood as separate to and different from actually finding your own relationship with that which is greater than us. And I come from a family that, whilst there was no practicing religion at all, and a very much moving away from the dogma of religion, there is a history of Judaism and all of the impacts of coming from two families who were had the implications of the history of Jewish people through their DNA and culture and how they were brought up, and then the talking about bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs or rites of passage. And so there are in some places, right, these like for a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, for example, you have to do 1 year's worth of devotional study to show up and then have this ceremony in front of all of your people to do it. But even then, I don't think that that's a proper, I don't know, proper rite of passage, right? It doesn't help you with all the different things. And these days I see people going and doing retreats, like you said, or going off, but they're more interested in the drugs or the bliss state or the like tantra or the energy or the whatever it is, rather than the actual, or they want it to be a big deal, right? Like they want to go straight for ayahuasca and like have something big and impactful happen, rather than understanding that they might just go and sit in silence for a weekend and nothing might happen, and that might be their rite of passage. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. I what struck me in that final part that you were saying there is how much sometimes a lot of that stuff is kind of for significance, right? So it is on itself a sort of a like an adolescent playing, which there's nothing wrong with that if it's an adolescent doing it. But yeah, so much of it that I see, not all of it, obviously, there's great people doing wonderful initiatory work out there. I even think back to the writings of Robert Moore, who talks about the archetype of initiation and the cultures he went and studied to learn how they would, like, you know, move their people forward, you know. And there's a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, I did ayahuasca, and it's this kind of like, it's this behind closed doors, you know, behind the velvet rope kind of thing. So it's done for significance, or it's done as a sort of an you know, this is my way of showing you how much more developed I am than you and enlightened, which is really an offshoot of the very kind of Judeo-Christian values that many of us are brought up with. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm now higher up. It's a hierarchy. It becomes literally like a hierarchy. Like, well, I'm now closer to truth because I did this thing. And I'm like, okay. You know.
And I'm not saying it can't be helpful in terms of meeting yourself, right? And like one of the best questions I've ever been asked, and I continue to ask it of my people, and I can't take, you know, the credit for it. It is my dad's. He once said to me in a difficult time, and he has said it repeatedly since, whenever I'm in those kind of places, and even if you are that, can you love and accept yourself? And for me, that question is one of the most crucial questions on this journey to adulting, to meeting ourselves, right? Like if you go and have an initiatory experience, the likelihood is that if you are honest with yourself, if you don't escape or bypass or find an excuse or, you know, prove or whatever it is that you do to show that you're worthy, if you actually be with it, you might meet a part of yourself that we call shadow. And it might be something that you consider bad, but it might also be something that you consider to be too good, right? And that the question that we get to ask around that is, even if I am that, can I love and accept myself? And ultimately the piece around good and bad, I think, is one of the things that stops people from properly adulting, is that they're terrified of and they use judgment and story all the time to constantly be racking up whether something is good or bad, rather than being in the isness of it. It just is.
I like that very much. The what if the answer's no?
Then you get to, and my experience and what I did when that answer was no, in 2009, right, was to was twofold, was to shift and change until I did, but also to understand. And a lot of that journey, by the way, was one of approval over acceptance, because I thought loving myself meant, like, what I thought loving myself or self-love was actually a seeking for self-approval.
Right.
There was a certain point where I realized that real love for self is self-acceptance, not self-approval, and that there gets to be a time when it isn't about, do I like myself or not? And for me, that's where it links in with values, right? And like, our values get to shift and change, and the beliefs that sit underneath of them get to shift and change. And there's lots of things you can think you have an opinion on till it happens to you, and then you do something that you didn't expect, and that's a layer of maturity.
I like that. It makes me wonder that, I wonder if there isn't more people who are getting back a no answer, and it's the struggle with that you're seeing. You know what I mean? The struggle with actually, no, I don't accept and love myself. And maybe there's good reason not to love and accept yourself. And perhaps, you know, some of the exploration, to me anyway, is that, like, well, if what you get back is a resounding no, rather than struggling with that, is that not the bugle call to change then? Like to not, I think what I see in a lot of kind of so-called grown-ups, but pre-adult grown-ups, is this sort of not even accepting the no, to use your language. If a no comes back of love and acceptance, then no, is that can very easily, I've seen, shift into blaming of others, diminishment of accountability, over fixation on appearances, you know, all these kind of things, rather than change form.
I 100% agree. And what I think happens is, at least in my experience and in my work, right, is that the first instance is that we need to meet the little part of us, the child in us, that learned that it wasn't okay, that it wasn't acceptable, that it wasn't approved, right? And then what most people get caught up on is hating on their mum and dads, blaming their mum and dads, right? Like, you did it wrong, they weren't good enough, right? And in the fundamentals, in this thing that I teach, there's a part where you get to accept that you are the adult now, and that whatever happened to you or that you experienced may not have been your fault, but is your responsibility. Because once you hit a certain place, no one is going to clear it up for you. You can spend your life wishing they would, but that's not going to get you very far.
Yeah, I like that. And I mean, I sometimes wonder whether some of that love and acceptance needs to be pointed outwards. Case in point, I remember that this was probably about 12 years ago, and my biological mother didn't raise me. My stepmom and my dad did, and it wasn't. They didn't like her. They didn't like my biological mother, and there was a lot of shit backwards and forwards there during my early years. And then, so 12 years ago, I'd have been, early 30s and mid 30s. And I remember having a conversation with my mum, which was kind of love and acceptance her way, where I was just sort of like, all these things that they messed up and the hatred between her and my mum and, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, man, she was a fucking kid. She was a kid. Like, I worked it out in my head and I was like, damn, this was all happening when you were all in your early 20s. And I was like, you were idiots. You were kids. You were barely out of adolescence yourself, right? Like, if you take it up until, here's why they don't diagnose narcissism, right, to anyone under about 23. Narcissistic personality disorder, because it's thought that the kind of behaviors you're going to see outputted from anyone between about 12 and 22 is gonna tick a lot of those boxes. And I was like, damn, my parents were all that kind of age when this was all going down. Yeah. I'm like, all right, you whatever, it's all good. I think she was worthy of my love and acceptance, and then it was up to me. It was like, all right, like you say, like, I'm the adult now. What I can take away from this is, I think many of us do, from past things that have happened, a whole bunch of shitty memories and stories, and sure, there will have been maybe a few habits of thinking and triggers, but like, I can work with those. That's on me, that's not on them. I can work on those things. And the world is full of brilliant, brave, to use your word that I've seen you using a lot recently, courageous people. The world is full of courageous people who have defied those odds, and yeah, I find that to be encouraging, encouraging thinking.
I do. One of the things that I am going to lead into asking a question around something, and we'll see where it goes. But one of the things that I see with people who had a similar experience, so my experience to yours in terms of parenting, not the same, but there were similar aspects. They were young, there was a split, there were then multiple parents, a blended family, and also one of them responded and one of them reacted to the situation, I would say. And so much of adulting, as far as I'm concerned, is creating spaciousness in your life or in your mind or in your body or inside of you or around you, so that you can distinguish and have space to respond over react. And that this kind of adolescent piece that you're talking about, or the grown up but not mature part, is constantly acting, speaking and thinking from reaction rather than from response. And there's something that you said around, so when people come on, I ask them some questions. So I asked you, what do you see as the most important or valuable shift or change that you've made for yourself in your adult life? And you said killing the adolescent relics that control behavior in inopportune moments. And I wanted to ask you about that, and put my premise, I suppose, around react and respond into that, and ask you whether you think that you are now able to respond in those situations rather than come from reaction. Something else has happened.
The only real answer to that is, I don't know. You'd have to ask those closest to me. Yeah. You'd have to ask my kids, you'd have to ask my wife, you'd have to ask my brother, who are the people that probably, you'd have to ask my clients. I would hope so. I think so. But I think the only reasonable answer I could say is I don't fully know. I think oftentimes when we're kind of healing and we're doing this kind of work, I refer here to the words, I'm going to butcher this paraphrase, but of Andrew Austin, who's a guy that sort of developed integrated eye movement therapy. Mm-hmm. And he's somebody that I collaborated with many years ago. And I remember he said, when people have sort of uh, initiated through or transitioned to somewhere new. And this could be as simple as like, you were once scared of something and now you're not. What we often do is we check for the presence of the past thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to be scared of spiders. I used to have let's just say, for example, I used to have a phobic reaction around spiders, where if there was one even 20 feet away, I'd lose my mind, scream, shit my pants, and run out of the room. Whereas now, when I see a spider, I might just be like, oh, I'm aware of that. It freaks me out a little bit, but okay. And what we often do, I think, is we check for the presence of the thing. So we're always like, oh my God, is any of the adolescence still there? And I think if you look hard enough, you'll find it. So with those, I'll call them triggers, but like the reaction pieces, right? I think we've got to be really careful, because if we check for the presence of them, you'll probably find it, or you might find some relic of it. It's like some echo of it, and it is almost like it leaves behind a bit of a vibe. I think what we should be checking for is new function. It's that simple, like new function. Am I functioning in a new, healthier way that is in service not just to me, but to my family, my community, my customers, my whoever we're working with? And like check for transition, check for difference rather than presence of something from the past. Because I think in this way, there's lots of people that, and I see this, I don't know whether you've seen this, Ebony, but like when you're working with clients that have already done a lot of work, when they come to you, like, oh, I've done that retreat and I've done these programs and and they still seem to be carrying the shit. And I'm like, what happened the last 12 initiations that you went through, or programs that you went on, or hot coals you walked across, or dolls that you burned, or whatever the things you're doing that are these significant rituals, apparently. And it's like relics of it have stayed with them all. They're constantly, oh, it's not quite gone yet.
Well, and I think a lot of people choose. I would say choose. They would not. And I have had an argument with someone recently about it, so I'm being mindful of that.
Oh, go on.
But it hardens into character. It becomes part of an identity, right? And people are terrified of not knowing who they are. They need, particularly in this day and age where you must have some character, some personal brand, some identity, you must be projecting out all the time, right? It's not okay to be like, I don't know who I am around that. I don't know what I think about that. I don't know how I feel about that. Give me some space and some time. I'm in the middle. I'm goo right now. At some point I'll come out. At some point, and I think for me, and I can't speak for anybody else, my identity is constantly changing, and there are parts that will always be informed by stuff that's happened, and there are parts where I'm like, and actually the piece around Misfit is a really good example of that, right? I don't feel misunderstood anymore. I still identify as a misfit because I understand, my whole life has been different. My experience has been different. The way my brain works is different, like all of those things. But what I used to mean by misfit is someone who feels like they have been othered by other people and is misunderstood, right? Mm. For me, the shift that has been made over the years is I take responsibility for the amount of othering I was doing to myself, the amount of reinforcing the stories of I'm misunderstood that I was doing to myself. And I have moved my feet, moved into different circles, into different communities, spent a lot more time alone. And I no longer feel all misunderstood by myself. Therefore, I feel less misunderstood by the world. And if there is a misunderstanding or a sense of like, you just don't get me, I just don't get you, I have no stickiness, animosity, like anything towards those people. I'm just like, you're not my people. That's cool. I don't like, there are plenty of people who are, and also I'm cool on my own. And so there's a part of it that hasn't changed, and there's a part of it that has changed completely.
Yeah. There's some interesting things in there. I'm wondering how much that sense of changing identity is is like a factor of personality as well. Like, so in psychology, there's the big five personality factors: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which aren't a kind of a map for who another person is, but they're a good indicator of tendencies. And it's interesting hearing you say that, because you will often find that I think our industry that you and I work in, this kind of behemoth field of kind of personal, professional, spiritual development, call it what you will, but this gigantic industry of ours tends to attract people with a high degree of compassion. Like they are for self and for others, but like in particular, there's a lot of kind of others-based compassion, like wanting to help other people, wanting to see other people fucking smile and feel some relief and feel some unburdening of themselves. And I also think that and that factors compassion is an aspect of their agreeableness. And there's also another factor of personality called openness, which is the kind of the prime dimension for creativity. And it's found the psychologists have found that sort of people with very high compassion, very high openness to experience, which again, that factors into things like your willingness to even think abstractly, consider ideas, the way you and I are here today, and aesthetics of that, you know, all those kind of things. And it's found that like people who are really high in openness, really high in compassion, will tend to have less of that sense of self. And that it might be, I might not put this well, but like it's sort of, it might be sort of personality driven. And whereas if you find someone with lower intellect, not IQ, but lower intellect, which is an aspect of openness, so less willing to explore ideas and abstract thoughts, much more kind of grounded, practical, what does this mean, what can I do type. And somebody less compassionate, which doesn't mean nasty person. It just means less bothered by the concerns of others.
Yeah.
Right. And those people, we will tend to be, they know who they are. They know who they are. I find it fascinating that, you know, when we talk about our people,
yeah,
you know, we're talking about these kind of hereditary aspects of personality to a degree.
I also really love what you just said, and I love it because one of the aspects of adulting, and I'm saying like it's the thoughts are forming in me as I'm like, this is not something I need for this moment. One of the aspects of adulting that I really see is that the more okay with who we are, or like we become, the more able we are to hold the difference of others.
Yes.
And that's a really important part of adulting, and a piece like I really wish the planet would hurry up and fucking do, right? Like I would still quite like us to live on this thing, even if I'm not here. And as you were just describing a person who knows who they are, is less concerned with abstract ideas, you know, all of those things. I used to find those people very selfish and uninteresting. And I didn't want to be in a relationship with one, for sure. Because all they did was show me how untethered I was.
Yeah.
Now, the person who I'm in a relationship with is all of those things. And I celebrate the difference and the range of perspective and the range of spectrum that we are able to hold, whilst because there's no prove energy there. There's not one person being like, my way is right, and the other person being like, my way is right. Instead, there's fascination and curiosity. And my fascination and curiosity is endless, right? And having someone on the other end go, that's enough now, I'm out, helps me to sometimes go, oh, cool. Yes, human body, day, like, what time is it? Okay, we're on the, and I'm like, thank you. I was slipping away into a place that isn't actually helpful. And it has meant that I am also, like somebody yesterday sent me a voice note with a whole load of things like that. Normally I love to engage. And my response was, I have zero capacity for that today. Ask me again tomorrow. And that's something that has changed about me, that I don't always have to engage in big thinking. Like sometimes I can have a, no thanks, not today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's arguably why we're so successful as a species, is not because if you'd have gathered a whole tribe of people with, say, really high compassion, low politeness, which I don't know without you know, taking a particular questionnaire, but I imagine you're very high in compassion, quite low in politeness. I am, and some of my clients are, and they're the people that are kind of like, they say it as it is. They're not so worried about the idea that their words might offend you. They're not so concerned with that. You know, doesn't mean they're horrible people. So these are literal aspects of personality that scientists, psychologists use. And I really like the Big Five because so many other sort of like, here's who you are, take this personality test. Some of them are magical, like I love them, but often they're commercialized. You know, it's like some business wants you to take their tests. Whereas the Big Five are just the one the scientists use to like predict what a human will do. Right. And yeah, arguably we wouldn't survive if you got all the kind of like high compassion, high openness, low industrious. Many of us in this industry come to this industry because we don't want to work, isn't life. We don't want to work from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. and then only have our weekends off. We don't want to do that. And arguably, if you had a tribe only of those types of people, they'd die really quickly. In any other given developmental phase of the earth, they would die. All of them die, and vice versa. You know, and so yeah, I like your reflection on that, because I think so too. It's helped me understand other people better, and just hold it, because it's like, yeah, in any given tribe, we would have needed a really good mix, you know.
100%. And I hope that I believe, so I think, you know, we've spoken about MBTI before, and I've never really loved it because it feels very subjective and changeable to me, right? And again, it's based on a business, and you know, someone wants you to go somewhere, it has an agenda. I love human design because it has the aspects of being able to embody a shift and change and grow. It feels like much more of a map to me. And beyond all of that, one of the things that human design says, and lots of other people say as well, that we're moving out of a time of mastering the material plane and moving into a time of mastering the energetic plane. And, you know, this kind of evolutionary piece where we, so when in a mastering the material plane, we all needed to be the same and do the same jobs and repeat them, because there was this industrialization for a long time that needed to happen. And as we're moving into this kind of new age where like we've moved through the information age, we do not need information. There's plenty of information. Robots can do the information, right? What we need is individuation. We need people to be themselves. And part of adulting, as I understand it, part of this kind of facing and embracing and moving into maturity is accepting that you are different, that you are unique, and being okay with that, because it is the future. But maybe I'm being an idealist because that's what I am.
Maybe it's an ideal thing, or maybe it's a sort of a prediction in a way, because I think the thing we'll have to accept, to come back to the acceptance piece, is really look at what that will mean. And I think this is where a lot of people get scared. But like, okay, let's just say, for example, we do lead more into a time that we have had before, that came in sort of around the Romantic period and in the age of Enlightenment. I've got this, I can't recall whether we spoke about this last time we spoke, but during the lockdown, I developed this expensive habit of finding and collecting first printings and first editions of really old books in our industry. And I found it so fascinating, because I can go downstairs to my bookcase and hold a book that was like part of the first print run, and the person writing that, who now are household names, didn't necessarily know whether this book was going to do well or not. It's something energetic about it that I love. Yeah. But we've had this time of sort of individuation when we were coming out of when we were coming out of Judeo-Christian mainly sort of, you know, doctrine and those kind of things. And I always think back then there was a cost, and so if everybody moves into this place you're talking about, it's like, are we prepared for the idea that all the people that do the mundane jobs, for example, like they may not want to do those mundane jobs anymore, and probably won't. And so all I want to not make sure of, but all I'm aware of and alert to is in myself and in those around me. It's like where we might go, oh God, AI is terrible, or oh God, automated checkouts at supermarkets. I want a real person. It's like, well, perhaps we have to own the idea that if we're going towards, as you call it, individuation, which I like, I think, well, if we're heading towards that, then we've got to be open to the idea that we won't have people perhaps doing those mundane things. If the individuation means I'm sweeping the streets, well, maybe that person who's sweeping the streets that we might see as a completely mundane, repetitive job that is not a full realization of that individual's individuation, then they may not want to do that anymore. And I think it's all going perfectly in some ways, because we probably will then need the robots to do it for us, because we're all going to be off looking to fulfill this individual plan for ourselves, you know.
Yes. And I think that's where getting to know people who are not like you is a really valuable part of understanding where the world might go, because I actually think there's a whole bunch of people who like repetitive tasks, would quite like to be, you know, who do enjoy building things with their headphones in, or who do, you know, also whatever it is, right? But they're not valued by society. We do not live in a society of equity in any way. There is, you know, we have had a lot of talk of equality over the years, and it's all a kind of whitewash for the lack of equity amongst difference. And so if we are moving to this place of individuation, we also have to shift what is valuable and what is to being less of one thing and more of lots of different things. I'm not explaining that very well, but
I think that makes sense. Yeah, the person who likes repetitive tasks, but you can bet the more that person, right? So what we're really talking about is somebody who feels different from how we think we feel, right? Like that we could not imagine that, right? Like
I can't imagine doing science all day long. I can't imagine standing in a classroom all day. Like, there's all sorts of things I can't imagine doing, right? Because I won't even walk a walk that is go to the end and back. It has to be a loop, because and so I know that left to their own devices, humans want to do all sorts of different things. But the thing is, the process of learning who we are starts really young, and little, you know, the way that the current education system was created was to turn people into unthinking robots who did what they're told in a system that had a hierarchy with one person at the bottom. And so that's got to change as well. We've got to be teaching our kids to think for themselves and to be respectful of each other and to express respectfully and to have these initiations that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you just said it. It's almost like you can't imagine. And it's like, well, I think part of our adult duty is that, like, we must imagine. We must imagine what it's like to be someone else. I don't think we can go, well, I can't imagine. I'm married to a diagnosed autistic, and her sense of the world is very different from mine. I can't go to have a successful marriage. I can't go, well, I can't imagine. It's like well, it's close cousin, which is like, I won't imagine. It's like, I think what we must do is, well, we must imagine what it's like to be the person who loves. And I think that's where we get to, what would you call it, hyper tribal, where it becomes actually an activity of exclusion over actual, and I think sometimes within there, it's just fear. It's just like, oh my God, I can't. The experience of the other human being is so alien and terrifying to me. I'd rather just stay here. And it's like, well, I think we've got to be willing to go, what must that be like? Can I actually exist within that in my mind and in my imagination, and see that person as, to your point, as valuable, not just like what's valuable is what I do and what people like us do. Yeah, I like that. There's lots of food for thought there.
I'm aware that we could just keep talking and talking, and I want to slowly bring it to a close. But I like this as well, because it gives me, there's one more piece of this that comes up a lot for me and the people that I work with. So I got a diagnosis of both ADHD and autism last year. And one of the wonderful pieces of that for me and also simultaneously, there's been a huge amount of grief, and there is a process of letting go of a part of you, and then giving space to another part of you that now has a name or a place or can be seen, right? And one of those things is that I had no choice, if I wanted to survive and thrive, I had to stop being myself and start thinking like everybody else and imagining how it was to be everybody else for the majority of my life. And so I'm only just starting to really center myself in my world, because I had to center everybody else in order to survive. And what I see with the people that I work with is that people fall into two camps. They've either never had to imagine being anybody else, right? They've never really had that experience, or they've had to really imagine what it is like to be everybody else for such a long time that they can't remember who they truly are. And one of the things I think is the most important part of adulting is understanding that there genuinely is no one size fits all, because what we are trying to do is come into some kind of equanimity or equilibrium, which is not static and moves and will continue to move based on what is around it. And so often when people come into this sort of work, they believe that there's a destination, or that there's a cure or a fix or something that will take them from A to B and then they'll be done, rather than understanding that what they're learning is a way of being in motion with what is.
Yeah, that's important. That's important, right?
Yeah. Thank you for coming and entertaining my brain. This has been a very, very fun conversation for me. Good. And I could talk about stuff all day. I have not yet figured out what I'm going to ask you in my one more question, but I am going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
And if people want to come and find you, learn all about the work that you do, come and get involved more in your conversations, where's the best place for them to come?
Well, it's lazycoach.com.
You have given me all the links and all the things, and so they will be in the show notes for people to click through. I just always like to give you an opportunity to say it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.